Alright, it's time for some guitar hunting. Let's check out the most recently listed Gibsons. We've got a pretty cool 335S, a nice 60 standard like the black plastics, but wow, what is that? It's the most beautiful fake I've ever seen. Welcome back, troglodytes, to your daily dose of guitar information, the Trogly's Guitar Show. Yes, that was a dramatic recreation of what just happened to me this morning when I saw this thing get listed a mere 14 minutes ago. So it's listed by a shop over in France as a Gibson Les Paul Custom Gaucher. And I've never ran across that word, so seeing this kind of cool thing with that, I thought, okay, maybe it's a weird custom order. But I looked it up, and I guess Gaucher, or however you're supposed to pronounce it,
Gaucher,
means left-handed in French. Unfortunately, just from this photo right here, I can tell you this is not a real Gibson Les Paul, because our whole headstock is like slightly twisted. Look how much higher this particular tuner is as compared to that one. Now there is a little bit of a discrepancy even between real ones, but it's not like this. Our truss rod cover is very slanted, and you could tell it's the wrong style, although as far as the fakes go, usually they look even a little bit more cramped than that. But as far as our logos and everything, at least they got the larger style one here. It's not like the smaller Epiphone ones, but as compared to a real Gibson headstock over here, once you've seen enough of them, you just know. But take a look at our body here. This doofy cutaway is absolutely hilarious. It looks like a banana, and the fact that it's just so pointed. Les Pauls are nice and rounded in that area, so they went a little bit too extreme there. Some other giveaways are the metric style bridge. Now that's not always a telltale sign because sometimes people put Tone Pros parts on their Gibson Les Pauls because they are nice and also have the metric adjustments. But we definitely have very cheap looking knobs here, as well as a cream plastic output jack plate. You could also make mention of not having fret nibs on the edges of the frets. Again, not every single Gibson that was ever created has fret nibs, but something claiming to be from 2006 would indeed have the fret nibs. But man, wouldn't this thing be beautiful if it was? I mean, it's a lefty, so not everybody can own and enjoy this one, but that's a beautiful vintage sunburst finish here going on, mixed with that awesome quilty wood grain. Now it's most likely a veneer in this case, but pair that with the cool P90 style pickups, I could see this being a custom order as like a 90s Les Paul custom. And that's kind of what I was hoping would be our situation here when I first clicked on it. But it's so beautiful, I couldn't not share it, even if it isn't exactly what the seller thinks it is. But this was the other reason I wanted to share this. It's dangerous to sell your Gibson custom medallions even if you don't ever want it on your guitar again. You can actually get decent money out of them, between $100 to $300. But sometimes this is what happens. People put them on their Gibsons, or a little bit more innocently, on their Epiphones. But I think this shop saw that and went, oh yeah, that's completely legit. And it actually does look legit. But it kind of helps hide the wonkiness of the rest of the backplates. But they are asking $2,800, which kind of tells me this shop might actually know it's not real. Because let's face it, if you had a quilt top P90 left-handed Les Paul custom, even if it was somehow miraculously from 2006 and still made in the Gibson USA production plant, I mean, we're talking at the very least be $4,000. Probably more closer to the $6,000-ish category in my opinion. So naturally, whenever somebody lists a fake as a real, I have to check out the rest of their inventory. Seems to be that they've got a couple of other lefties, but let's check out this SG for them. It's looking okay, besides our truss rod cover being a little bit wonky because it's a lefty. But yep, that looks completely authentic to me, even the good version with the ABR1 bridge. I would assume this is probably created around the same time as that other one, if the serial number was actually correct. It looks like it maybe says 99, something like that. You might have a headstock repair, kind of hard to tell from these photos. And not much to go on as far as the description.
Guitare Gaucher.
But to continue our fake theme today, we need to next head over to Oklahoma City Music Exchange, where they have listed a Gibson Vintage Humbucker. That title always catches my attention because I don't mind stockpiling some of these rarer parts when they're a good price like this. So naturally, I pull up these photos and I look at these pole pieces and they're not Gibson in style at all. Like for example, here's an early set of T-tops. You see how these screws would easily fit inside the cover if you were to screw them all the way down, adjust your pole pieces essentially, so they're very low? These ones look like they sit on top of the cover, like they're keeping the cover in place rather than being your typical pole piece. If you flip it over to the back, I was impressed with what I saw back here. That's like some cheap Gibson pickup, but they actually have the Gibson USA engraving on the back like most 490 series pickups do. this is not a real Gibson pickup. You can tell just by the conductor wiring coming out of it. I mean, it's 2-conductor, but typically it's a rule of thumb that all Gibson pickups have this braided wiring because it's vintage in style. Now, that's not every single case. For example, in the early 70s, the SG Deluxe model actually has a plastic tubing over top of their 2 conductors that a lot of people get tripped up on thinking that it's been replaced. Now, as far as finding a tiny wire like this, yeah, you're just never going to see that. This is just a really cheap budget level pickup, but they're at least brazen enough to put the Gibson USA engraving back there, so I thought that was funny. I could see how this could get past a shop like this because it looks like they're an actual place. They sell budget level guitars as well as some random effects. Because as far as other pickups they've seen, it just looks like some pretty lower end stuff, and it was probably just traded into them. So nothing against this shop by any means, but hopefully they see the video and take the listing down. But to jump off the topic of fakes of a real Gibson Les Paul that kind of looks fake, let's check this one out by Ikibe Music over in Tokyo, Japan. I'd saved this one early one morning because of how unique it is. Look at that, it's a mahogany top. Just in case you didn't know, the original Les Paul Customs actually did have the mahogany tops to them. However, this is just a regular Les Paul Custom, not necessarily a 54 or a 57 reissue. But how can I tell if this particular one is not a year reissue version? Well, it's because you've got the Nashville style bridge. So this had to have been a very cool custom order. Stock from the factory without any kind of a pick guard because you don't have any holes drilled into it, and black plastics. Flipping it over to the back, you got all the natural wood grain as well. But before we continue too far, let's take a look at our serial number. It looks like it says 500-345, something like that. So that tells us this is a 2015 produced guitar. Now, what do you know about 2015? From late 2011 until early 2019, Gibson had to utilize Richlite fretboards for custom shop customs. They just didn't use ebony because it was hard for them to source. But this was one of those guitars that was built around using a rosewood fretboard. So this also has that nice brown hue. They should have just left the headstock veneer alone instead of putting the black on it. Just let that be natural, like on the Paul or even a Bob Marley signature special. So I was thinking this would be a cool collection piece as far as telling the story of Gibson. Some dealers had to get creative of how to make the rosewood fretboards look good and traditional during this era because the Richlite boarded customs were a little bit harder to sell. Because Les Paul guys are pretty traditional and dyed in the wool. They want the ebony board. But there is some sort of a blemish on this guitar. It's either been rubbed through the finish or the stain just didn't quite catch on this mahogany, which I'm leaning more towards that. The price tag's a little bit strong at $6,500, but I could see these becoming collector's oddities in the future. But I would personally suggest waiting until that one's marked down to about $5,000. Along similar lines here's an R7 with a one-piece mahogany top. So R7 means 1957 reissue of a Les Paul standard. So typically, these would be gold tops. You're going to have your ABR1 bridge construction, you're going to have your long neck tenon and other historic features. But instead of being a gold top, you just have your mahogany showing. Now, did you know, just like the customs, there are, in fact, some mahogany top standards out there. But according to the Vintage Price Guide, they're worth about 10% less, despite being harder to find, simply because most people want the maple underneath it because it's the traditional tone woods that people think of when they think vintage Les Paul standard. So it's kind of cool to see an R7 specced out like this. And we also have a streaky rosewood fretboard going on here. Kind of reminds me of my Aldo Nova signature that you can learn about in this episode. But if you're sad that you don't have the maple top because you might be missing out on some flamed figuring, it looks like this is pretty ribbon mahogany-like to me. It's going to have that dancing chatoyan effect to it. But hey, they even decided to do a really bright red back. But judging by our serial number in COA style, that one was likely from 2004, which lines up with how the seller's describing it. Typically R7s from this era, they top out around $4,000, so they're asking about a $2,000 premium, but make them an offer, you never know. Speaking of late 90s, early 2000s custom orders, let's check out this Les Paul special. So the seller describes it as Met Orange, and this really reminds me of like a mod collection guitar, but about 20 years before they even did that, because it's just a bright orange Les Paul special, but without any type of a pickguard on it. And it's not only on the front, they also did the complete back. But as far as other special specs, I'm not seeing anything. That leading photo almost made me think maybe it had that carved top, but no, it's completely flat. But these custom shop specials and juniors, they definitely take a very unique buyer to purchase them because back when these were produced, the vintage ones really weren't that much more money, unlike today. But it looks like this one's gonna need a little bit of a fret polishing, and it has a Gibson USA case. How much is he asking? $5,000. If somebody were to book a private help session with me, I would probably say it's worth between that $38,000 to $5,000 range. So it's definitely listed at the very top of the market. But if you're a collector of the weird, quirky custom colors, it might be worth it to you. But for most people, you'd probably be happier picking up your typical TV yellow one from various years for around $3,000-ish. But if all these have been a little bit too crazy for you tonight, check out this R8 with what is listed as a monster top. I had a viewer of the show send this one in. I love this really crazy mineral streaking wood grain stuff going on here. They definitely had to have dyed it to accentuate that a little bit more. And it wouldn't surprise me if these photos are a little bit doctored to make it look a little bit more extreme than it might be in person. Because if you continue to scroll past all of these beautiful photos, especially this one, and that one, you get kind of a more regular one. So this is probably what it would have looked like in a store. Maybe not quite as crazy, but you can definitely still tell the dark mineral streaks lining up with the wood grain. But did you notice the other thing that changed? This is its stock configuration with covered pickups. Having these dirty dual cream pickups really transforms the entire vibe of some burst guitars. So I guess if we're being brutally honest here, is this really a monster top? Not really. I mean, it's a really nice top, but I wouldn't call that a monster top. What makes it explosive is the wood grain underneath. But if these photos are any judge of anything, having this thing in person and being able to move it in the light, find those perfect angles, probably wouldn't be that difficult. But whenever something's called a monster top, there's usually a premium price associated with it. This time it's $6,500, so a little bit less than a brand new R9, but you gotta remember, R8s brand new are about $5,000 today. But these are generally plain tops, they just have very minimal figuring within them. And you have washed cherry sunburst, lemon burst, iced tea burst, and bourbon burst to choose from, and currently none of those are even available on Gibson's own website. So is it worth paying $1,500 extra for a unique top? I think it's totally worth it. Somebody will make an offer and take that home. Seeing that this is from 2020 year production and nothing's really changed too much in their whole lineup as far as how they spec them out, if I were to have purchased this, that's probably about where I would have put it too. But how's this for an interesting one? So 1977 3 pickup Les Paul Custom. Just in case you didn't know, in the mid to late 70s, it was an option to have 3 pickups. Most commonly, you see them on black, wine red, and natural Les Paul Customs. So anytime I see a factory stock one, I'm always looking for like that particularly clean one to add to my own collection. And this one, not particularly clean, but it might be close to stage 4. So we got a giant crack right here by our toggle switch. It could just be the seam line, or it could be a crack, kind of hard to tell from this photo. But what made me click on this is, yeah, you see the whiteness of the binding in these areas and how ambered over it is everywhere else? That's because the finish has just been completely worn through on those sides. It gives it an interesting vibe. Even the gold's like just pretty much worn off this thing. So naturally, you gotta see what the back's like. Looking like maybe a little bit of water damage. How about our headstock? Oh yeah. So there are a few different reasons why Gibson guitars go ambered like this. The most common, tar in the smoke, in the air, where you were gigging these things for hours upon hours. The other time is in extremely humid areas, like when guitars show up in Malaysia. It is very common for them to be like mint condition, but for whatever reason, the extreme water moisture content in the air makes the lacquer go crazy dark. So you can never be too sure what the cause is when it comes to buying guitars online, but there's at least 2 of them that I know about. Because sometimes if it's just tar in the air, some of it will wipe off, but not all of it. Usually if you see some white areas yet, that's just because the finish is flaked. But if you start to see a lot of seam separations, you can start to tell that maybe it's high humidity. And you might want to check where it's for sale. Like this one's in New York. That's probably just regular seam lines showing. That doesn't look like separation to me, so I think we're all right there. This was definitely probably a pub player. Gotta love that wear on the neck. That is 100% natural. And usually a big crack on the top of your guitar is a turn off to me, but that one's got stage 4 vibes. So I say pick this thing up and keep playing it. But there's definitely some mojo going on at the bottom, and some mojo going on your original bridge. But hey, nice, it's got the original chainsaw case yet. But when buying one of these 3 pickup ones, you always have to make sure it's factory stock and original before paying a premium. And I'm shocked this thing still has original pickups in it. Speaking of kind of cool, but not necessarily rare, here's one of those SGJs from 2013, which are really cool guitars, right? They initially looked like this. But this one's been like sanded down, modified with Seymour Duncan pickups. It almost kind of has some Tony Iommi vibes to it, like some of his modified John Birch guitars. Like it was very amateurly sanded down. It almost looks like it's got some additional holes right here. Custom pick guard. Instead of putting binding on it, they just painted it. Oh man, that looks awful up close, but from far away, I mean, it's okay. I mean, you guys gotta remember, these things were dirt cheap, brand newish. And everybody always thought they were fake because of this giant Gibson logo, so having whatever this is on it is an improvement, but why does it have the top route Floyd Rose locking nut? Okay, so that's probably what that is. They always advertise those top mount FRX systems as not leaving any damage. The only damage they leave is 2 small impression marks. So that might be what that's about. But oh my goodness, it almost looks like they sanded our horn to be kind of dull over here too. Yep, I'm betting that one might need a little bit more work in the finishing department as far as making it feel like nice and smooth again, but nothing a little bit of sandpaper won't fix. The price? $400. I mean, in today's market, that's not bad depending on what kind of pickups you got in there. The only caveat being is you need to live in Ashbury Park, New Jersey, or be willing to drive there. All right, Troglodytes, I think that's enough guitar fun for tonight. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and we'll catch you tomorrow on the next one. Take care. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, consider subscribing. I post videos like this every day. And you might even enjoy this next one.